podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead Podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. Peace. This is Good Brothers. Before we get into this episode, I just want to say thank you to all the poll workers, the people who put their time and volunteer energy into making our electoral process operate. I may not be an advocate of all things that stem from the experience that we have in this country, but I definitely advocate a democratic process in any systems that would change or however the world will be. People must have a voice and a vote and a say, and there has to be a means for that to be collected, counted, measured, tracked, documented, what have you. So, in any event, let's get into the show. Peace.
Peace.
Peace, my brother. What's happening?
Man.
Yeah, man.
It's an election inflection. You know what I'm saying? I was trying to find a rhyming word, and the one where you change the L and the R came in. I felt like that wasn't appropriate.
Okay.
That might take us in the wrong direction.
Okay, yeah, this election.
Yeah, that might be like, what they talking about? Like, nah, man. I mean, it ain't like Wu-Tang, we for the children. This ain't a children's show. You know what I'm saying?
No.
So, it's Friday. Usually I don't say the exact day we record, but it's Friday. The officiosity points to a certain outcome, but that's not where this election process started. And I thought it would be good for us, even in lieu of one that's been a depressing reality of the world, as it were, in America, coming through this week, coming out last week. So I think it would be hard to not talk about it in some way and some of the results and some of the things that are going on. So we had a conversation last week that was sort of pre-election, and I also held a conversation with a couple of brothers, Monday night before the election. And I think, I want to reiterate something that remains the same, is that I need, and I want people to understand, or those that are listening to understand, is that elections do not change or erase underlying issues. They change your strategies, your priorities, and what may be more favorable under one administration versus what's favorable under a different administration. But you still got to work on whatever issues or whatever changes you're trying to work on. And all that requires long-term planning process, thinking, outreach, and all the above. So saying all that to say, though, man, what were some of your first thoughts as all this has been playing out?
So the first one is a very broad one. And I worked with my team and just anyone who was around and would listen, in a sense. But like dealing with anxiety, right? So part of this is with social media, we send each other everything, right? It's like the COVID before COVID, right? Like you get something from somebody, like you get the cooties, right? Or how back in the day with ringworm, right? You be paranoid. Somebody had ringworm, right? Kids of today will never know about ringworm.
What happened to ringworm, man?
I don't know. I guess a whole bunch of other stuff came. Yeah, a whole bunch of other stuff came up, and they figured out how to get rid of it. But and so what I mean is like the understandable anxiety and stress around a racist, a bigot, a xenophobe, a chauvinist, whatever other terminology, rapist, you know what I'm saying? Racist, rapist, chauvinist, bigot, right? So people are conveying this to each other, and they're sending messages every 10 seconds or 10 minutes telling about how stressed they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it stresses other people out. So I started, having meetings with our team, and everyone's stressed out. So part of it is recognizing, when we go through these things and when we're thinking about these things, everyone understandably should be on edge, but also the importance of mindfulness and the importance of getting a route to be able to deal with the gravity of the situation, but not be too overwhelmed by it just because you transmit that and everyone's not dealing with that well. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like for some of us who it's funny that we're anxious and someone drinks a bottle of wine, it's somebody else that really hurts because of the anxiety plus the other things they're anxious about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. That I think is a bigger, broader health and wellness vantage point. Oh man. So I'm gonna start here. I forget the coach. It was a black coach, or it was maybe Jim Moore that talked about they are who we thought they were.
Oh, yeah, that's my man. It's a black coach. Dennis Green.
Dennis Green. They were who we thought they were.
Yeah.
America is who we thought America is.
Yeah.
Right? You have a racist, a rapist, a bigot, a xenophobe, a chauvinist, a general idiot who paid less taxes than you did, may have more money than you did, and tens of millions of people voted for him. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Millions of people decided that this was a better decision than a lifelong, by all accounts, solid guy, quote unquote, politician that has been able to work on both sides of the agenda, both sides of the aisle, and a phenomenal Black and South Asian woman.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to ask the question, how do you make that decision that let 200,000 people die? And at some juncture, just acknowledge and said that it's fine and we just got to keep going, right? That's a sociopath. And millions of people voted for this person. And we have to talk about why. And the media, they're using numbers to obscure this phenomenon, right? They're using the Cuban vote in South Florida to obscure this phenomenon, right?
Right.
They're using the Venezuelans or the 20% of Black men who disagree. Everybody that's Black knows it's 20% of Black men in your family that disagree with everything else that's going on.
Right. At all times.
At all times.
On principle.
It doesn't matter. Has anybody been to a Black barbershop? There's 20% of the people in the barbershop who disagree. There's somebody, if everybody talk about Jordan and LeBron, they're going to tell you, even though it's not incorrect, that Oscar Robertson was the best player.
You ain't see Elgin Bella.
You didn't see Elgin Bella. You
don't know what you're talking about, son.
So 20% of Black men disagree all the time. Right? So it's amazing how we talk all this stuff about why do communities support people who aren't in their interest when 65% of white people voted for Trump. I'm gonna get back to that, but that's the biggest thing that really hit me, that we are who we think we are, that America has had no level of reckoning, right? The killing of George Floyd, the shooting of Jacob Blake, the murders that have happened, the calling out the things, watching poor people die because of COVID. None of that stopped 60% of white folks in this country for voting for the aforementioned.
Yeah. And like that to me too. I mean, we talked about that, we were confident it would be close, that it wouldn't be. And I really would like to at some point, and maybe with someone who knows more, interrogate this want to like, oh, it's going to be a wave and like a smashing of you know what I mean, like of no Trumpness, right? And the different, even the Tuesday, I guess the Wednesday, like columns are like, oh, they chose white patriarchy, they chose this, they chose that. And all I could think in this, and this goes, like I said, as a child of the Reagan era, all I could think was, how'd y'all think this was going to go any other way? What evidence has ever been produced, and especially even to my ain't nothing changed crowd, you know what I'm saying, in community, talking about us, and then, external, whatever that crowd is in other communities. It's like, yo, at what point in any of this has it been shown that as a mass, that community or that constituency or group of people, however, it needs to be framed, ever goes, some of this stuff ain't right, man. I'm definitely gonna go ahead and vote with my man, black people got a raw deal. Then this ain't helping. I'm gonna go ahead and do this. I'm gonna go ahead and vote. No, they always vote within their interests. Overwhelmingly, they're able to assume the risk and comfortable, kind of going, look, we'll risk it all in the name of the thing that I think I need. You know what I'm saying? And whether that is, explicitly, because they don't need to explicitly believe in whatever we assign as the values of Trump, but they can believe in the what I'm going to get back. And it just, I'm a little bit perplexed, you know what I'm saying, with people. And like, how did you really do that? And then for larger media, to the degree that I watched it, to basically kind of go like, well, yeah, but that's, we knew that, like, we all knew that only like 60-70% of the white folks was going to vote the same way that they voted in the past. So we want to talk about you other people. We want to elevate, well, why didn't 90% of black men vote for Trump versus for Biden rather than 82%? You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Or, like, and at the piece you sent me, with in terms of the, even the construction of the concept of Latino, like I said, like, which is not for me to parse, but like I said, I always question, I don't know if, the Cubans, everybody knows about the Cubans in South Florida. Everybody knows that's back to Reagan.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that ain't no new constituency.
Nixon,
like,
actually, but yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
you know what I'm saying? Like, it ain't just show up on the map. And so it just strikes me like the mental backflips and oh man, like, why wouldn't this turn out and that and do. And it's like, no, look, y'all all know why. It seems on some level it's almost like the only people who don't believe or the only people who seem to have some challenge in believing actually how important our constituency as black people, our voter turnout is sometimes us.
Right.
We keep arguing about the shit. Everybody else is like, yeah, actually, we totally worried about what the black people gonna do because we already know how we get down. Like,
right. I mean, but to your point, and this is something I've recognized early this year, whiteness is omnipresent yet invisible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're not saying how could 2/3 of white people vote for a horrible human being. We're asking, like you said, a difference of 8% in black men, or why Cubans and Venezuelans are scared of autocratic government, even though they're living under an autocratic person, right?
Mm-hmm.
why they're scared of the idea of autocratic ideas.
Right.
Like, we want to parse that out. We want to talk about Ice Cube and all that versus, yo, why are y'all supporting him? I tell you, interesting thing today. So I'm reading Jim Baker. Jim Baker's biography. It's called The Man Who Ran Washington by Peter Baker. Really good book. Really extensive book that shows you the history, not just of Jim Baker, but also of the what became the modern Republican Party, which I think, going back to this broader conversation, we don't know anything about. Like, when you don't know anything about between Nixon and Reagan, you miss a lot. Because between Nixon and Reagan, I would argue, framed the rest of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
So anyway, Jim Baker, who was the most powerful unelected person ever in American history, as far as government, rather, I should say. He is the kind of example of all chief of staffs to come after him, not only in the presidential sense, but often largely in local and state politics too, right? What, at least at that time, was not seen as ideological, all this kind of stuff. I was reading something this morning, and it indicated how, of course, James Baker is not going to support Trump in what he's doing, but James Baker voted for Donald Trump. And that lends itself to the conversation we're talking about. That if the standard bearer for a chief of staff, a presidential chief of staff, made the decision to support a reprehensible human being over Joe Biden, this is deeper than we perceive. And the American political system is deeply polarized in ways that I dare, frankly, think is above change and beyond reproach. That might just be because of the time we're in. I might 2 weeks from now, I might be like, I don't know. Look, walk around a little edgy already, as what it said.
Yeah, right, I'm already a little tight right now.
Yeah, but like, that just showed me, like, wait, you voted for him because you're afraid of the far left agenda? You think Joe Biden is going to forward a far left agenda? You think a person that worked as a
state attorney general.
A state attorney
you think
general?
A state attorney general is like, oh, actually, I got the ill super duper triple socialism plan in my back pocket. I just been saving it for like 2 decades.
Right.
Get the fuck out of here.
Like, come on, man. Like, what are we? So the fact that we're not interrogating this appropriately is how white supremacy is invisible yet omnipresent. I'm going to assert to you that what we saw shows that there are millions of white people who, while them personally may not be white supremacists, are white supremacy complicit. They're complicit with a system if it benefits them, which is actually politics, right? I mean, part of the challenge is, I think sometimes the Democratic Party and especially the progressives, folks who identify as such, make it moral judgments versus interest judgments, where I would argue the Republican Party shows you they're interested in interest. They will suspend their morality for their larger interests.
Yeah, they mask interest in morality.
Right.
And they use moral concepts to actually mask, like, no, actually, like, oh, I'm against abortion, and I think it's because the children, and we shouldn't do. Meanwhile, if the kids get here and they're living in squalor, oh, that's the parents' fault. We shouldn't do anything for them.
And they're willing to be vicious about their morality. They're willing to suspend the morality to advance their interests about morality, which, depending where you end up on the spectrum between Machiavelli and, a pastor, whatever, like that's where you end up. But so what I'm saying, so like That is what we have to acknowledge. And this happened with the worst presidential candidate to ever run, right?
Yeah.
Literally, I thought it was difficult thinking about back to our childhood that someone could be worse than Pat Buchanan, right? Like, I didn't think nobody could be worse than Pat Buchanan.
Pat Buchanan was pretty bad.
Pat Buchanan is like, I don't know, Gerald Ford. Pat Buchanan.
Like Gerald Ford, someone who never was intended to actually be in charge of nothing.
Right. It could
Compare
compare
to skills that were useful somewhere.
Well, he had skills, as a vice president, right? Like he had skills as a vice president, which I would argue the skills of a vice president are different than the skills of a president. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's much like CEO and COO. Mm-hmm. A lot of CEOs don't make good COOs, and vice versa. It's actually a different skill set. And I would argue that a good vice president has an entirely different skill set than a good president. But anyway, you got to go far back to find someone as bad as this guy. And the fact that so many people held their nose to advance their interests should realign expectations going forward. So what's your take?
Well, I think the idea that it's been and it's still been is in my mind in one of our previous conversations, and it's still in my mind now, is to me the concept of what you're willing to risk for your interests, for your conception of power, for your idea around what will keep you in the position that will get you the most benefit and reward, right? And it is clearly there's a large body that says, because to me, I look at the risk of a porous, poorly run U.S. United States, which used to be the big deal, supposedly, of the Republicans during the Cold War, right? Was that the U.S. couldn't look weak, in the face, of the Soviet threat, and what that meant in terms of the global construct of like where the world economy would go, where the world order would go, where the world structure would go, right? Whose ideas would be, put into or be, the way I like to think about it, would be rewarded. You know what I mean, via trade and what have you. And at this time, this party seems to me to either assume the world is too weak to hurt the United States. Like I really think there's a hubris that we're dealing with around like what else is happening in the world and what it means if you are seen as a standard bearer or an authority in the world, whether that's a good thing or not, right? To all my people that might be listening, like, Justin, are you talking about being an imperialist? Like, no, I'm not endorsing the United States being an imperialist. However, the reality is if the United States military presence and the larger concept of what the United States is diminishes, the world is not the world, somebody else fills the void. And that may or may not be good. May be totally fine. Maybe it won't be fine. But the idea that there's a large contingent of people who are willing to shape the very like foundational concepts of, what keeps this country going, which is no small thing that we have successful exchanges of power.
Right.
Regularly. Like I know some people, whatever you feel about that. But there's no guarantee if there's not a successful exchange of power that the world is going to break in the way that favors you, even if it goes against those who you think are your enemy. Like it could just be bad for everybody.
That's right.
It could be 40 years of bad for everybody. And I am not in any way, I've studied too much world history to just be flippant about the risk. Like I've seen, we're going to, and it's like, yeah, they was fighting for 52 years and nobody got shit. A lot of kids got hurt. Whole people lived their whole life And yes, I know people are living their life in pain right now, but there's deeper levels of pain.
Right.
And to have no plan, no parachute, no idea, and to be willfully just like, I'm cool if that goes that way. It's just it's a certain level of cavalierness that I can't have. I am, honestly, like that to me is more stark and frightening than like, these toy soldier dudes running around with vests on and ARs acting like they're gonna shoot something. You know what I mean? I'm gonna just say it like this. I I was born in Trenton, New Jersey. You know what I'm saying? I lived a lot of my life on Fountain Avenue, Goose Park Drive. I grew up in Willingboro, which is a nice working middle, I guess for black people, middle class town.
Yeah, right.
I don't give a fuck about you and your toy soldiers. If you're gonna pull the thing out, go ahead and use it or don't use it. But I'm not gonna sit over here in fear. So like everybody that goes, ooh, look at the militia dudes and 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 also some great reading around like in our public commentary discussing those people as militia, because if even in the Constitution, it clearly says a regulated militia, which implies the state, not a bunch of toy soldiers running around with guns acting like they're gonna do something. I just like you out here selling wolf tickets and you can kiss my ass. Like we get focused on them people. I see a whole lot of anxiety about them people. I ain't worried about them people. I worry about these people who have the ability to move resources, the ability to make rules that set up a structure that allows foolishness to prevail. That will prevent, even if you get somebody who's a poor leader out of office, that now you can't remove all the terrible people that he put in place in our operating structures that run real things, from grant programs to services to a wide variety of internal decisions. Like that to me is like you feel okay with saying, nah, it's cool because he's going, because I'm so afraid of whatever these other people are going to do that I'm willing to risk that. I am so terrified of, or at least consider myself terrified, or I think I won't be harmed if this doesn't go well. But I won't let what you want to do go further, which may harm my financial position, my access to power and control. So like that to me is the thing that I get in. Like I'm like, y'all, I've studied these things. I've read, about, what I'm saying, once you were the most powerful country in the world, and then like, you're not so much.
You were not
anymore.
And so, but I want to touch on that because I think it's important for us to put a geopolitical perspective, which, it's fascinating to me how much America doesn't do well thinking about the rest of the world, but how much the rest of the world has to think about America. It's much like hip hop and like until a certain point in the 90s. You know what I mean? Like the rest of the world had to look to wait for a record to come out, but New York didn't have to wait to think about Houston, right? New York didn't have to think about LA, right? We don't spend time thinking about the undeniable fact that the Russian government tried to and actually did influence last election.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is known, absolutely. It is on the books. It is also not deniable that as recent as a week ago, Atlas, who is Trump's health advisor, spoke to Russian state radio and downplayed COVID. These things are not deniable. It's not deniable that Russian government tried to influence Steve Bannon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that we downplay this and downplay the role of what this unpeaceful transition appears to be in the world, we are being naive or dumb. The result is the same. Because if anyone doesn't understand, it's funny. I was talking to people, and everyone's like, "So, I mean, how don't we know the night of?" And I'm thinking to myself, the rest of the world doesn't know the night of who won the presidential election. It's only kind of like in America that
Right.
we project who won and no one questions it until, and I was explaining to somebody, all the votes have to get certified.
Yeah.
That's
It always takes the entire month.
It always takes the entire month. Because we have this system that has lulled everyone to sleep respectively and has been a peaceful transition of power, we never had the conversation about all the other stuff that you should have learned in Civics 3 that you don't get to take in high school because we don't take Civics 3. That actually the transition of power and certification of votes takes a month, as it does in every other country, right?
That's why we do it in November and not the first week of January, 2 weeks before the inauguration.
Exactly. And so, but the fact that we don't have this dialogue about the nature of what's happening and think it's really just about Joe Biden and Donald Trump, like this is not about geopolitical, that all the money I made back today on my stocks that like I had lost because of the confusion,
Right.
that these things don't have global implications, right? And so, it's fascinating how we don't kind of understand that. And again, to your point, no matter where you exist on the space of American involvement in global affairs, lack of clarity about what's happening in this country is not good for this country and it's not good for the rest of the world.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think is connected to that, and I was reading, there was a good little piece on like maps, and then people were making their internet jokes about, oh, look at all these parts of the country I'm not going to go to, and blah 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 blah. You know what I'm saying? And and I get the joke, ha ha ha, it's funny. But the deeper thing is like if you look at a map that shows a county that's got 4,000 people in it, but is 7 times larger than the county with 500 times more people in it, you can give yourself the perception of that size as indicative of an actual area of influence and control. It's like, well, actually, it's like 4,000 people there, and bless them, bless their hearts. I hope, I think most of them are probably well-meaning, nice people. However, we have a structure that gives and is always given unbalanced power to those who own land or at least exist in a space that looks like they own land, right? And that is even in the seeded roots of sort of the idea of the corrupt democratic blah blah blah. Part of that is out of the reality, the politics of the late 1800s, that the democratic machines that existed in urban industrial areas, where it was within their interests to create these patronage vehicles, and also the rules and a whole bunch of other factors at those times, the patronage system that, we don't have in the same way anymore. Like some of that is seated in that reality and a part of the rhetoric of the Republicans of that time, even if those Republicans were less conservative than the ones we got now, or first of all, everybody's conservative in America. All of them are conservative. Just, in the broader sense. Like none of them, like the socialists in the early 1900s had a separate party for a reason.
Right.
Just so everybody, so all y'all out there that's going to say something stupid, go do some research. That's a Justice PSA. However, like it's seeded in, when you study Tammany Hall and how it got down and what it did, but it is about a pragmatism of the circumstance of how people are situated. Right. And so we have people in this country, and everyone knows this. You have people who are equally poor, but they're situated in different spaces, and they don't look at each other's interests as the same.
Right.
Their relational position, their concept of how they will get where they're going to go, what they think is the problem. Who's responsible? Beyond whatever level of personal culpability they have in their circumstance. Which there's a place for personal culpability, and then there's the structures and systems around us that put us in you may start it out on Nadi, you started out in the dugout. You didn't even get to the bat. Like you're not even on the field. Like you cleaning the hallway, hoping they'll let you take some practice swings and see you got skills. Like, but anyway, the reality of like what we're really dealing with, and even when folks sometimes will like I'm going, looking at this deeply, and we gotta finally change and all this language, and then just be like, look, man, if you're not gonna go, for those of you who are connected to these people, if you are not going to embrace them and go talk to them as their family members, as their business partners, right? As maybe your manufacturing, situation is set up in their town. If you're not going to look at, great book, Sundown Towns, it has which is often is matched as a sequel to The Lies My Teacher Told, which is an analysis about education, but it's equally an analysis about the placement of whiteness in America, in that the entire spaces were very intentionally and willfully by the people who lived there kept white as possible, so that you could, you would just not have to deal with black and brown people, unless they were coming in very, very specific and understood subordinate roles. That the same people who will probably, if you ask them on their ticket from Tuesday, yeah, I'm all about free markets and woo, 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 woo. And if they say, oh, well, there's, it's a contingent of developer people, they want to buy some land in your big county. There's a lot of, rural, like timberland. They want to buy a lot of land for some timbering, but also to have some for a retreat center for their community. Like, oh, that sounds great, like a Christian group. And they're like, no, well, they might be. I don't really know. I know they're black. They're like the black something. They're like, whoa, wait a minute. The black, what do they want to do? They want to buy, right? Like all of that free market shit will go right out the fucking window. You know what I mean? And I get upset with folks in our community when we will fall for the hype that these people really believe in that stuff. Like they believe into it until it challenges their interests. And there's always a deep-seated piece of America that worries about black people, especially moving out of the station that I think you should be in. And if I see you out here, like, what you out here speculating on timberland for? What you about to do? Like, I'm about to make a play. You know what I'm saying? Just like you about to make a play. Oh, I can't have that. I gotta go talk to my congressman.
Well, again, to your point, like there are some people who I fundamentally think they've parsed out, they're voting for Trump and benefiting from the tax benefits or reducing regulations. I do think that there are people who fundamentally have other kind of relationships, not just with black people and brown people and with newcomers and immigrants, but with other white people who disagree with them.
Yeah.
I just think they're really clear about their interests. Right? Now, sometimes we want to assault their interests, and I think for the livelihood of people who look like us, I agree we should interrogate the interest. But I also think sometimes we make it such a one-on-one, like, okay, you being like that means you're as bad as this person. I don't know. I think we just need to talk through this, because the thing is, how do you extract somebody from a system that they've always benefited from? But like truly extract them, not like white tears extract them, like truly extract them. And what is the process of truly extracting someone from a system that they benefited, even if they don't benefit in the long term? It's very much like how me and you talked before this, like the same way people will be like, well, you don't support selling drugs, but you know that blankety blank person is giving away these turkeys, right, and paying for this basketball tournament with drug money.
Yeah. Even if it got laundered 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, you know where it came from.
It's dope money.
Right? And people are like, yo, because of the nature of the system and the interest they have, right? People make decisions.
Yep.
And it's sometimes not even aligned with their personal feelings.
Yeah.
Right? But the system is always bigger than your personal feeling. And that's where I think we have to get through to that, but in a way that's relevant to people. that what we see, and again, I think it's important to say this, they made that decision with an absolute moron. What happens when the person that's just slightly less moronic runs again?
Yeah.
While We're Polarized by Ezra Klein, I'm not all the way through the book, but it's a good book. And if anyone, I usually don't do props because, cut us a check. But Ezra Klein has some good interviews and he has a good book. And he talks about, if you look at the numbers going back to the 80s, there was always about between 15 and 20% of black men that voted for Ronald Reagan. And there was always 65% of white people that voted for Ronald Reagan, right? The only thing that changed was Obama, right? Like the Obama shifted white and black folks, or some white folks, right? And it shifted black votes.
Yeah.
So when the black votes, even after Hillary, kind of went back to normal, or Secretary Clinton went back to normal, everyone's like, what happened to black men? Nothing if you look over the last 40 years, right?
Just the other black men that didn't vote that way anyway went back to going the way they go.
Exactly. They went back to doing what they've done, right? And so this is a making of a larger, broader system designed to make sharp distinctions. Because at one point, and this was one of the biggest things I've gotten so far out the book, Republicans were just Republicans and Democrats were Democrats. So what we used to do was say, a Republican, you were a Rockefeller Republican, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you were a Scranton Republican. You still were a Republican, but that clearly showed in your party, right, what kind of Republican you were. Likewise, we would say you were a Southern Democrat, right? AKA you were a racist, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like, that was our way of explaining who you were. We hadn't created liberal and conservative yet. That's a relatively, in American political history, new creation.
Yeah.
And it has served to sharpen the distinctions and serve as a proxy for interests, right?
Yeah.
And so now we go liberal, then progressive, right? We go moderate, which could go either way, but usually goes R, and then conservative, and then even libertarian, which usually goes R too, right?
Yeah.
So we've created these other phrasings to do this, but it's important to know that American political history was not always this way.
Yeah. I mean, just even if you like, I know all my armchair political scientists, love to go, it's been two parties the whole time. And I go, the Whigs were like a real thing. And then they just weren't.
Right.
You know what I mean? But like the Whigs, like it wasn't the Republicans, the Democrats, it was the Whigs, like were a whole group for like 60 years, 70 years, the first 60, 70 years of this country. Right. But, if you want to selectively analyze history to, further whatever half-baked idea you have about political organization for Black people, you'll leave that part out. I really, my salient thought just on all of this is that I would really, and I don't know if I might not be using this word right, but it's the word that bubbles to my mind. We have a determinist opportunity to like make things happen in the world via the way we are organized and situated. And I think there's people who further an idea that we have no ability to determine what the outcomes are. That like the very, to me, quite lazy analysis of, they're just like the same party. Like, yeah, but they got all them books and notes and think tank organizations and charitable like it's a whole network of stuff. The two things that you saying are essentially the same. For them, maybe they're not really that much the same, right? Maybe your party can't get on the ballot because you have not developed a following where people have to deal with you. And if you want people to deal with you, you got to make them deal with you. You got to build the thing. You got to build the apparatus. You got to get the people and the minds and the ideas to see or be a part of that larger perspective.
And they have to see their interest in your thing, right? Because here's the other thing, right? And I think to the Republican Party's credit, they have convinced many, prior to the moron being president, they had convinced many libertarians to find themselves in the party that they don't really belong in. Right?
Yeah, they totally.
They don't really belong in that party, because whether you're looking at Ron Paul or his son, I don't think they really belong in the Republican Party for real. Like, no. They don't. Right? For all this good, all this bad, usually, frankly, about the Pauls, right? They don't really belong there. Yeah. In most of the countries, except here, in Canada, they would have their own party, and they would caucus with with another party, right? They wouldn't be a party by themselves. Yeah. So we forget that. And again, because we don't have a international political context, we assume that there's only two parties, which seriously limits what you think. But then, to your point, it limits how do you frame for the interest. Like if somebody's like, okay, you need to vote with the Green Party, right? Okay. But then now we have to have a conversation about the Green Party's long-term apparatus as a means of voting your interests and not just your politics. See, the Republican Party is still a means to vote people's interests. The Democratic Party largely has been a place to start voting your politics or your morals. And that's why, besides I'm struggling with this, so I want to ask you this. I don't want to assert this. Besides a system that gives much more weight to certain votes than it should, namely white people. Because the fact that when we look at like the map and be like, oh, Montana went to Trump. Okay, but Montana going to Trump and Montana getting 2 Congress senators, right? Mm-hmm. You've given a largely white state a lot of power, right? Yep. You've given them a lot of power, right? You've actually empowered them. But I just think like we have to have a better conversation about interest and politics, which goes to my point. I want to ask you this, and it seems simple, but I want to get your insight because you're a really insightful person, and usually you're like the prodigy of thinking about stuff. Like you use the word to rhyme that we didn't know that they was going to rhyme with. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like you be thinking prodigy about to say something and he don't use that word, or it might not rhyme, but it made sense that it didn't rhyme that time.
Right. Like, and I went outside.
Yeah, right. You'd be like, oh shit, that didn't rhyme. But you know what? That was the best bar you could have shared there. But like, really, this idea, not just of the Electoral College, but even the Senate, right? Because there's 2 elements of this. We clearly know that from the origin of this country, the idea was to quote unquote prevent majoritarian in a majority authoritarian rule, right? For however you want to frame that when that was created, that was the goal. So now we have a situation, going back to my point, where because of the Electoral College in the Senate, right? Yeah, it's true. Some people's votes really don't matter. Like, if you're in New York State, given the politics of New York State, down ballot matters, which I want to talk about after this, but your presidential vote, given the history, kind of doesn't. Your vote as a Black person in Pennsylvania matters way more than than the Black person voting in a state that you border at its current incarnation, right? Mm-hmm. So, where do black people's votes really matter? Atlanta, Detroit, Miami, Wisconsin, Philadelphia, Cleveland, right? Like, you can actually pinpoint the places on the map.
Yeah, you can tip the scale.
Tip the scale where the votes matter nationally, right? Okay. So between that, meaning everyone's vote, generally speaking, isn't the same and has not been the same for the last 30 to 40 years, right? Number one. And then the fact that everyone gets 2 senators. So you're privileging Montana in that way as well, right? Because the votes out of Montana, the votes out of North Dakota, the votes out of South Dakota, knowing that they're doing voter suppression of the indigenous nations and tribes out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do we do about a system that was fundamentally meant to be to prevent majority authoritarian rule, but ends up now privileging the consistent livelihood of white privilege and white supremacy, and actually does minimize the votes of some black and brown and white people across this country?
Whew. So, I mean, my first thought, and whatever the risks it creates, I think the filibuster has to go. If you got enough people, I mean, the structure of the Senate creates enough constraint versus what the House is.
Yeah.
That idea that you'll have someone who, one, is in office longer, right? Because they do 6-year terms, instead of 2 or 4. They are elected on a statewide level, right? And with the direct vote for the Senate, which was not always the case. Senators used to be picked by the state legislature, which I think it's better that the people vote for the senators. You know what I mean? That then that senator is put in a position where they can't go. It makes it harder if you want to get stuff done to just be like, well, I'm just going to vote with my party. At some point, the people in your state would be like, no, dog, you keep going up there and voting with these clowns and you name it, and we up here hurting.
Right.
You need to bring back the bacon, my man. Not that I advocate eating bacon.
Right.
Veggie bacon. Maybe even turkey bacon.
Turkey bacon, coconut bacon. They got a whole bunch of bacon these days.
Beef bacon. There's all kinds of bacon. You know what I mean? Like, I'm from New Jersey. I'm from a state that sends out more in taxes than we get back.
Right.
I live in a state that I'm not sure where Oregon is on that ranking. I'm sure it's more closer to gets a little more back than it gives. But, you know what I'm saying? Like, you have an outsized kind of representative, you know what I'm saying? There's 2 people that get to represent 5 million people versus 2 people that get to represent 21 million people, 22 million people. Right. It's like, you shouldn't walk around with such hubris about, whatever the hell you think about the world. It's like, hey, man, like, there's a whole lot more people behind that guy over there, that woman over there, that person over there. And so that, to me, is one that, like, this idea, and I don't, off the top of my head, remember all the history of the filibuster, but generally, just part of me is like, the idea that one person could be like, nah, man, I ain't just with it. We just ain't going to vote. It's like, nah, man, there's 88 people here want to vote. We're going to vote. Go sit your ass down. So that's one part. The other part, though, I think is, I think there's something to really, in terms of future politics, folks really having a ground game and engaging with people, whatever the risk is. Because I do not think that it is in the best interests of our communities to have this perpetual, like, I live in a city, we just don't understand each other because you live in a rural area thing. I think it's a fully fomented and politically created thing. Like, there is a structural piece around perceptions of land and, like in practice, right? There's real perception, there's real stuff around, like, how much space you need to live on, and land as a business versus land as a thing that you build things in, and you do business with spreadsheets or factories or whatever, right? There is a real part to it, but there's this other part that's fully contrived in even going back to settler culture, what you had to do to convince a escapee peasant from Scandinavia to come across the Atlantic, go to northern Minnesota, and then try to set up land on the ancestral home of the of the Lakota people. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a whole
right.
You know what I'm saying? There's a construct in there that has to be wrestled with and thought around what land is and what land isn't. But the idea that, in this state, living next to California, still like 70% of our produce in the United States comes out of California. That wasn't always the case in terms of all the food that everyone eats.
Right.
Like, 40, 50 years ago, your local farms actually produced some of the food that you ate. Right. So if we had something happen that interrupted the ability of produce to get out of California, we would have a famine issue in this country very quickly. Right. That isn't really long-term good for California. I mean, it's good for California if you happen to be a giant landowner who grows 5 million tons of almonds for almond juice.
Yeah,
there's a billion tons of that, right? And long as the profit's good, but it's not really good. It makes the country structurally vulnerable, right? It's not good that Oregon ranchers someone would feel they're helping Oregon ranchers to take over a piece of federal property and say transfer it to local control as opposed to transferring it back to the control of the indigenous people who still live there, who that is their ancestral land, or the idea you would want to have that conversation without them involved, right? It's an absolute, and then on top of that you would think that the people who you sell your commodity products to are not valuable people. Meaning, if you eat beef, I don't care if those 700,000 people in the really more than that in the Portland metro area are one of our biggest customers. I'm still mad as hell at them because they don't think about us in this way or that way, right? It's not in the best, and it's something even in the politics of this state. Living here, there are a lot of inroads to try to go like, look, man, like some stuff that you people in Portland might want, we ain't getting because we got a whole rest of the state that ain't really with that shit.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Even the way we've dealt with COVID, you know what I'm saying? There's certain shit that makes total sense, here in the metro area that don't make sense in Joseph County. You know what I'm saying? Don't make sense in a county with 4,000 people in it. It's like you gotta do that and have that flexibility. But I think that it's a great strength of the United States to have this giant bit of land and this giant diversity of way people live. But and I don't know, probably somebody at the Democratic Party is going like, Justice, you crazy? You gonna spend all that money go talking to them people? I'm like, yeah, but at some point somebody got to break through the thing and say, look, man, our interests are not that far apart. I don't know what the vehicle is. I don't know what the bridge conversation is to say if we're going to have a society that can persist in a healthy way for 100 years till the planet gets too hot and we all die. We're going to have to figure this shit out. Like we have to, I think that there are, I think there's, like I said, the structural thing I think about is the filibuster and just the whole concept of like what we've had for the last 25 years, 30 years, where it's like nobody votes for anything in Congress unless it's a party vote. Like we gotta have, we're like, no, there's actually pragmatic things that people need that y'all need to work on. And that's why we sent you there. And then I think the other thing though, from an organizing perspective, like I said, I think in terms of how people organize themselves, personally or community wise, is to start thinking how can I expand the sense of where I have footprint beyond, whatever place that I may live, where, I don't know, some, it's got to be some, I don't have it all worked out, but some sort of alternate pressure to, the kind of stranglehold on people's lives, sort of like the idea of like, I can only live in this environment or that environment, where then you're subject sort of to the conditions of that environment, where if you're willing to be like, well, actually, I'm cool with living over in this environment, and whatever risks come with that. I think that's some of my first thoughts on that particular question. The other thing, though, that's coming to me too is, I mean, do we even have I don't think we have a very honest national conversation, and I don't think our, some of our elected representatives, even business interests, will speak to sort of like everyone that's in a gigantic state like the one I'm in, actually every state, but especially this one, in these Western states, like the infrastructure that allows the connectivity between where you live and the rest of the world is totally and fully dependent on the largesse and the functioning of the federal government. So all of this anti-government hoopy doopy you be talking, cut that shit out. Because the train lines, the freeways, the canals, none of your states had the money to pay for that shit. And you won't have the money to pay for that shit. And you all need that. Now, I understand that highways and other big projects, transit infrastructure and all that stuff in large, dense areas also need the largesse of the federal government, right? You know what I mean? But they're two sides of the same coin, you know what I'm saying? And if you are going to live and operate a business in a commodity lean space, right? And again, it goes back to that settler colonist structure that's even rooted in, that you went there to do something that was an extractive business. You may need to consider not being in an extractive business. Maybe you live off the land there, which I know some people want to do that, but then there's problems with that if you don't want to share with the indigenous people who was living off the land there in their own way before
right. And you took the country took their shit, right?
Right. You know what I'm saying? So I think like somebody figuring out, like really pressing folks though on that, because like I said, it's one of the things that doesn't really hold up scrutiny. Like first you be like, oh well, we don't need it. Like, man, how you gonna truck all that out of there? Well, we gonna, with what tax base? You gonna bond out roads? Fuck out of here.
Well, that's the thing about the relationship of the broader process, that it gets obscured, right? So people are incentivized to go to Washington or to go to insert state capital, right? And get stuff for their people, even if there is an imbalance in what their particular community creates, right? So the rural places, go get what I need. I don't care how you get it.
Right.
Right? And sometimes in the cities, we essentially say, go get what I need. I don't care how you get it until you take some wrong votes and cut some bad deals, and then we want to vote you out, which is a whole other complexity, right? Because we tell you go get what we need.
Right. You cut the deal.
And then now it's like, oh, no. That deal was above reproach. That deal was a bridge too far. Right? Like, so there is this, because of the general way that Democrats and Republicans have both framed going to Washington or going to your respective state capitals and not doing that business that's required to produce the results for the place you live, you've actually de-incentivized a person producing results and incentivized performative reality.
Mm-hmm.
You've incentivized the Tea Party. You've incentivized, and I actually don't put any of what people call the squad in this category, because they are all, in my estimation, really good elected officials, regardless of where you stand on everything that they may assert. They all serve their districts really well, right? And so, but we've created this space where if you go to Washington and go get the stuff people want, you are a creature of Washington. So you've actually disincentivized the give and take that come with scarcity, right? Because there's only a scarce amount of resources. You disincentivized cutting the deal to make sure everyone's okay. You've incentivized partisan behavior.
Mm.
And here's my thing: when you incentivize partisan behavior, poor people and black people and brown people and quote unquote brown people, you know what I'm saying, whether you want to say Latinx, however you want to say where people came from, they may share a language.
Absolutely.
And indigenous people, they lose when you disincentivize that, you know. So but yeah, I just wanted to get your take on that. I know you wanted to you know, close this evening with the conversation around Stacey Abrams. So I ask you to, you know.
Oh yeah, we can pivot there. So I mean, and especially in the last, I mean, first let me say this: Stacey Abrams was dope before whoever of y'all that decided in the last 48 hours when it seemed like it was working out in Atlanta, in Georgia, decided she was dope again, because y'all wasn't saying that on like Tuesday night.
Right.
Tuesday night it was radio silent about the sister, and then as it seems that things are pointing to that, you know, it may that may be the outcome, and that and none of that. Well, I'm not saying that any of the work that she was involved in wasn't meaningful either way. I'm saying to us, as the way we talk about shit, we'll talk about something being dope when we find out that it might work in our favor. And we're like, oh man, look how dope that is. But the thing, you know, when I first became aware of her in the previous election cycle, and she, you know, really, you know, almost became governor, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. And the you know, in the last, the point she puts on making sure people can use their voting privileges, and sort of just as a response to like what I was thinking about with her speaking that I thought was important, and I think it was adjacent to the conversation we had about Ice Cube, and my question to Ice Cube was not about Ice Cube going to engage necessarily with, you know, the Republican campaign machine. My question was about having the apparatus to make them implement what you want after the fact, after you go and appear in whatever way to endorse would be a part of that, right? Or, you know, even the legwork and the groundwork that goes into kind of the rules and the structure of this democracy. And I just, you know, wanted to give her props for, you know, responding to an outcome by displaying the thing that we know that people that are really committed and engaged in these things politically do, is that they keep working. Right? You went for the thing didn't work out, you don't go, all right, now I'm just, you know, unless you get burned out, and then you be like, I'm gonna go, you know, be a lawyer or whatever other thing I'm good at. Because a lot of times, if you were good enough to run for a statewide office, you are actually good at other stuff. Right? But I want to, yeah, just hold space for that and say, like, the most important thing I just said, that these processes are winnable via doing things. Right? They're not going to be winnable necessarily by, like, we're going to convince that 65% of white people that it's wrong, that their interests that they, you know, that rampant systemic racism is real, and that it, you know, they're like, no, we're going to work on getting the people we need to get out voted. We're going to work on making sure the rules allow us to get what we need, which is what a lot of black people do to survive the system, is making people follow the rules and or finding a way to navigate around the shit that's going to try to take you off course, right? And I think it's, anytime I see that, I just like to remind people, and not to say that is fair. And I think even I listened to her recent interview on the Khan show, and I listened to an interview with her, I think it was earlier this year, with Leonard Wilmore, Larry Wilmore. You know, used to have show, you know, Larry Wilmore.
Yeah,
you don't know that, you know.
And the writer, where was he a writer?
writer of a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff you don't know you're writing, including the Bernie Mac show being probably
the Bernie Mac
biggest,
shows,
but also behind, part of Issa's squad with Insecure.
Gotcha.
You know what I'm saying? And the general thing that, like, because we'll often cast somebody like her in this sort of like, oh, well, it's elite black people and they've lost touch. The politicians, the politicians, they ain't really about us. You know what I mean? But in multiple times I've heard her articulate the idea that, like, look, I have benefited from the circumstances of my family who were not necessarily wealthy people, but they got me in the right spots, and then I made some moves. And then also, though, like, look, I'm competent, I'm skilled, and if we want to win stuff, we have to have we got to have a plan. We can't just be out here trying to change society based on this sort of argumentation of value systems thing. Like, we also have to go like, no, these are the ways that you need to get things done. And then your opposition has interests. And if the rules work that they need to work with you to get their interests met, then y'all work together and you get your shit done. Yeah. And like, to me, that's the politics that makes sense to me. And I just, I want to give her some props for that. Also want to, like, think about, though, with people, to caution the way, you frame her and her own intent. Because I don't think that she would, from what I've seen, that, like, she's necessarily asking people to, like, make her the hero of this moment, for whatever this moment means. If everything works out and our society does not descend into some kind of electoral chaos in the next 3 weeks because somebody does some wild shit. You know what I'm saying? But, like, so one love to her. But also, my thing is, I'm looking to more, like, dope stuff in the future, right? Like, she's displayed a level of political leadership, that I think is good for black people and good for the country in the long term. And so, that was my biggest thought on Stacey Abrams.
No, that's so I guess, I think you dropped it the way it needed to be dropped, in the terms of old black folks. You broke it down, so it don't need to be broke no more. You know what I'm saying? When old black folks said that, well, they wasn't old then when they said it. They was cool and young when they said it. But they're old now. They're old now. Break it down, brother, so it don't need to be broke. Okay. That's the hip talk. As my man would say, Harold Melvin and Blue Nose. Oh, I seen that down with the hip talk.
I seen that down with the hip talk.
So I guess, again, to your point with Stacey Abrams, one, she's clearly a student of history and of power. Even her decision to personally campaign for the vice president job, right? To openly campaign. I will say, when it happened, I was like, I don't know about that. Again, because sometimes you get in the status quo of a system and you get this thing of, like, because here's what people do. They're campaigning for it, but they don't tell you they're campaigning for it, right? So what people do is create these quiet proxy wars, right? Mm-hmm. They create silent wars to win it versus coming out and being like, hey, I want this. Like, if anyone thinks that Senator Harris didn't campaign to become vice president, you're out of your mind, quote unquote, or you're lying to yourself. I want to be ableist. You're lying to yourself.
Yes, sir.
She on the other, Stacey Abrams was like, yo, dog, I want the job. What's up? Now, in government, because of this fake idea of, like, propriety, right? I was like, I don't know about that. We don't do that. But it's like, she's like, no, I wanted to put myself out there. Like, I had to play this a way that y'all knew that if y'all didn't leverage this, you were going to have an issue with my population. And so she got fully vetted. Mm-hmm. By her getting fully vetted, she created a different level of relationship with the Biden campaign. And in broader sense. But because she's a student of history, progressives and people who are armchair political scientists create this great person theory of history.
Mm-hmm.
That one person changed everything. That Martin Luther King was the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
That Malcolm X was the Nation of Islam, right? L.S. Shabazz was the Nation of Islam, right? Like the Black Power movement, Huey Newton. Like, do you
one
person, and we're still buying into that. We're still buying into this one person system, where I'm going to argue the reason politically, one of the reasons that folks who have the right thing in mind lose to those who don't, because those on the other side don't buy into the one person system of history. Trust me, some of the people who supported Trump are very happy he lost.
Yeah, they're like, whew. They ain't got to deal with Bull no more.
They still maintain, but they still maintain control.
Yeah.
Make no mistake, they gain seats in the House. They very well may maintain control of the Senate, and in local government, specifically in Pennsylvania, they had their way down ballot.
Yeah,
absolutely. So, we have to have a different kind of conversation about this. About this great person theory of history. But Stacey Abrams, to her credit, did not buy into this great person theory. She said, let me give you credit for the people who worked with me. Because what we want to do is be like, we want to perform and send messages and show that we was down with the right person. Now you want that person, hey, Joe Biden, do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, no, do the right thing for the system of people who delivered.
Mm-hmm.
Do the right thing for the ecosystem to make sure that now you can get those 2 Senate seats and you can flip the governor seat in 2 years. That's the right thing. Not to give Stacey Abrams a job in the cabinet that she would be disconnected from the actual work on the ground.
Right.
Or if you're going to do that, make sure that the 4 people that worked with her, or 5 people that worked with her, actually get the resources to continue to flip the governorship and flip the Georgia House.
Right.
So it's almost like what we think is the solution. So I give props to her and respect to her, but this idea that in social media we have that she did it by herself is just incorrect. That she registered 800,000 new voters. What? Do you know how difficult it is to register 80 new voters?
You by yourself with the little pamphlets you might not get 40 if you had 200 joints to hand out.
What are you talking about? And they told you the name was Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, don't give a fuck. Like, what? Come on, man. Anyone that's ever tried to register one knows when they give you fake names and they write the names down and then they be like, thank you, brother. And you be like, cool. And then you walk away and recognize they said the name is Donald Duck.
Dewey Decimal.
Yeah, Dewey Decimal. Because they don't want to be registered. So I give props to her. But just like most things we talk about, it's really about reinforcing the role and power of a system and not just individuals. So
all right,
just wanted to share that.
All right, man. So I think we could wrap there. I have a bevy of funny things that I want to talk about. What I think your man's is going to be like if everything, if nothing bananas happens that changes our society in a way that may never be irreparably harmed. But I'll save that for when we have some.
Hey, we're gonna have a lot of time.
I'm asking. Right. We got a couple weeks. I can work on my material.
This ain't ending no time soon. So
straight up. So word up. Well, guy, I appreciate you.
Appreciate you as always, man, and thank you for creating this space for not just the good brothers, but also Ask Your Oldhead and the elements you're doing out there to really create the space to have these, I would argue, these dialogues that aren't being had other places.
Indeed. So with that, I'm saying peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to my good brother, I'm Majestic. Thank you to you, the listeners. You can find Ask Your Oldhead Podcast, Good Brothers, and our future podcasts and works right at askyouroldhead.com. You can find them here on the Ask Your Oldhead podcast feed. You can find it by searching Ask Your Oldhead, Justice Rajee, or Good Brothers on the internets. You can support the podcast, number 1, by listening, 2, sharing, 3, by becoming a patron. Your monthly contribution allows me to make the space and time for all the back end things that allows me to keep this content up and keep it running and keep it growing as I move forward into whatever the future will be. I appreciate you for listening. Please share with a friend. Big up Ask Your Oldhead or Good Brothers on any of your social media platforms, man. Share it with a friend if you like what we're talking about. Also, you feel free to give feedback at Justice Rajee on most Instagram and the Twitters and all of the various social platforms that I might be present on. You can also, if you check the show notes, you can leave a voice message. You can go to the Facebook group thing. You can do all kinds of stuff, man. The world is your oyster, as they say. Maybe not an oyster if you don't eat that. But in any regards, please be safe, be kind, be righteous, take the best part for yourself, and share abundantly. Thank you for listening. Peace.